Picture this. The Galactic Council Chamber, a place so monumentally impressive that your brain struggles to process the architecture. Floating crystalline platforms suspended in what might be space, or might be an elaborate light show. Honestly, the aliens never explained it clearly. He has gathered the most intimidating collection of species the known universe has to offer. Each one convinced beyond any shadow of a doubt that they are the apex of existence. The Krell, 10 feet tall with exoskeletons that look like they were designed by a committee of weapons manufacturers. The Zargon Collective, thousands of them sharing one consciousness, moving like a school of fish, but more terrifying and less wet. The Luminari, beings of pure intellect so advanced they communicate primarily through mathematical equations and disappointed sighs. And then there's Marcus Webb. Marcus arrived at the Trial of Champions precisely 47 minutes late, because he'd been to a bar the night before and nobody told him about the time zone thing. He was also still wearing the same shirt from yesterday. It had a coffee stain on it. One of the Galactic Council members, a being composed entirely of crystallized energy, literally dimmed with what could only be described as profound disappointment when Marcus shuffled into the arena, asking if there was a bathroom and whether these people did catering. See, the concept was simple enough. 8 elite squads, each representing the finest specimens their species could produce, would compete in a series of trials to determine once and for all which civilization had earned the right to be considered the galaxy's top dog. The Galactic Council had spent 3 years setting this up. They'd organized committees. There were subcommittees. Someone probably made a PowerPoint presentation that took 2 weeks to create. The aliens were serious about this. Humanity's contribution to this magnificent display of interstellar superiority was Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old former construction worker from Ohio who'd signed up for this gig because the compensation package mentioned something about covering his apartment rent for the next 5 years, and he'd just been evicted. The Krell squad was doing these synchronized demonstrations of their combat readiness, each one moving like they'd been carved from rage and certainty. The Luminari had already started working through theoretical problems that would require Earth's best scientists approximately 700 years to solve. The Zargon Collective was sort of just floating there, ominously as a unified consciousness, which they managed to make look very intimidating without really doing anything at all. Marcus walked up to the designated human area, looked at the equipment and said, "So what's the deal here? Do I gotta sign anything else, or can we get started?" He was genuinely confused about why everyone was staring at him, with expressions ranging from horrified to outright contemptuous. One of the judges, a Valorian with approximately 17 limbs and the personality of an auditor, checked its crystalline data tablet and made a sound like a dial-up internet connection mixed with existential dread. "This is humanity's submission to the Trial of Champions?" it asked, gesturing toward Marcus with what could charitably be described as uncertainty. "Yeah, that's me," Marcus said, already looking around for somewhere to sit. "So, when's lunch? I'm thinking maybe we grab a sandwich first, stretch a little, then get into the heavy stuff." The Galactic Council did not typically have awkward silences. They transcended such primitive communication methods. But in this moment, sitting in their floating chamber of crystalline judgment, they found themselves experiencing something that could only be called collective embarrassment. Marcus sat down, pulled out his phone to check the time, even though it had no signal anywhere in this dimension, and decided he was just going to wing this whole thing. He had no idea what was about to happen, and honestly, neither did the universe. The first trial was straightforward enough. They were going to run through an obstacle course that had been specifically designed by the Galactic Council's top engineers to kill most species on their first attempt. It had moving blades. It had platforms that would collapse if your mass exceeded certain parameters. It had a section called the Void Corridor, where gravity worked differently depending on which direction you were looking. The Council considered this relatively generous for a lethal obstacle course. The Krell squad went first, moving through the course like a well-oiled machine of violence and training. They'd been practicing similar challenges for their entire lives, which in Krell years meant approximately 140 of Earth's years. Their commander, a being called Kurax, who looked like someone had made a sculpture of pure determination and then given it armor, completed the course in 7 minutes and 33 seconds. The crowd went wild. Well, not wild exactly. The luminaries' version of wild was increasing their emotional notation by 0.03%, but it was respect, the Krell version of a standing ovation. The Zargon Collective navigated it in perfect synchronization, each individual drone following an optimal path calculated in real time by their hive intelligence. They completed it in 6 minutes and 19 seconds. There was audible tension among the judges. The Krell had trained for this specifically and had already lost. They were going to be terrible sports about it later. Then came Marcus's turn. He stepped up to the starting line, scratched his chin, and asked if he was supposed to run through it or if there was some kind of trick. Nobody answered him clearly because the council had started communicating through probability matrices, which is what they did when they were stressed. Marcus took this as a yes and began. Here's the thing about Marcus that nobody could have predicted, and frankly, probably should have accounted for. Marcus had spent 20 years in construction. He'd navigated unstable scaffolding while carrying 90 pounds of materials. He'd learned how to move efficiently because inefficiency meant working late. And Marcus absolutely refused to work late if he could help it. He didn't know about the gravity differences in the void corridor because he'd just assume it was a physics joke and move through anyway. He didn't hesitate at obstacles because hesitation required thinking about whether you could make it. And in Marcus's experience, you could make almost anything if you just didn't overthink it. Most importantly, Marcus was completely unaware that this course was supposed to kill him. So when he came to a section with moving blades, he didn't treat it with the reverence the other species had. He just sort of slipped between them in the way humans have been slipping between things for thousands of years. When he reached the collapsing platforms, he didn't calculate optimal routes. He just walked across them the way humans have walked across unstable surfaces since someone decided to build a bridge out of logs. The gravity corridor confused him momentarily, but then he just kind of adapted to it the way humans adapt to everything, which is poorly and without complaint. He finished the course in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He was barely breathing hard. He did one-handed push-up when he stopped, just because his shoulder felt a little tight, and he figured why not. Then he asked if there was water anywhere because he was thirsty. The entire arena went completely silent. The Luminari had actually stopped thinking for a moment, which for them was like having a stroke. The Zargon Collective had to pause their consciousness sharing for a minute to process what they'd just seen. Somewhere in the middle of their hive mind, someone was probably thinking about filing a complaint. The Krell looked genuinely offended, as if Marcus had personally insulted their ancestry by doing better than them while appearing to barely try. Marcus's score went up on the board. There were some mathematical notations next to it that probably meant something in 17 different languages. What they all translated to was basic confusion and mild concern that the universe had just broken slightly. One of the judges, a luminari called Stellix, who was approximately 8,000 years old and had seen most things the galaxy had to offer, made a note in their records. The note read simply, "Humans possibly dangerous due to fundamental difference in processing reality." Marcus, meanwhile, had already sat down and was asking if he could take a nap before the next round. He seemed to genuinely think this was a warm-up exercise. And honestly, given that he'd just outperformed 8 elite warriors who'd trained their entire civilization's worth of existence for this exact moment, maybe he wasn't wrong. The Galactic Council started their first emergency session of the day, which would not be their last. Round 2 was supposed to be where the physical species got humbled and the intellectual species got to shine. The Galactic Council had prepared questions so complex that the best minds on Earth would need specialized equipment, reference materials, and probably several decades just to understand what the questions were actually asking. The course included advanced mathematical proofs that required thinking in dimensions humans didn't even have names for. There were strategic warfare simulations using quantum mechanics and principles of tactical excellence developed over millions of years. There were physics problems that required an understanding of the universe at levels that made quantum mechanics look like elementary school arithmetic. The Luminari squad went first, naturally. They were beings of pure intellect, evolved from a species that had decided approximately 6 million years ago that having emotions was inefficient. They moved through the problems like water through water. They solved equations by intuition, They predicted outcomes of warfare scenarios using probability calculations so complex that the display screens keeping score literally couldn't render the numbers. When they finished, the judges updated their records with notations that basically meant, yes, we expected this. But then Marcus arrived at his station. Now Marcus was not an idiot. He had a high school diploma. He'd taken some college courses before deciding college was expensive and not really his style. He could do his taxes, he could handle percentages, and he could understand basic geometry enough to build a deck without it collapsing. But quantum mechanics? Strategic warfare involving 17-dimensional space? Mathematical proofs that required thinking in conceptual frameworks humanity wouldn't invent for another 1,000 years? Marcus looked at the first question, which was displayed on a screen in front of him. It was approximately 400 characters long and didn't contain a single word in the English language. It was pure mathematical notation. Marcus squinted at it. He waited for someone to tell him if he was supposed to be able to read this. Nobody stopped him. So he did what humans do when they don't understand something and they're too tired to fake it. He just started thinking out loud. Okay, so this thing here keeps repeating, he said, pointing at a symbol that appeared several times. That probably means it's important, and this other part looks like it's building up to something. So I'm gonna guess the answer is probably whatever makes this whole thing balance out, right? Like everything's got a balance. He scribbled something on the pad in front of him. The judges looked at his answer. According to the answer key they had, Marcus had solved the quantum mechanics problem through what could only be described as cosmic accident. His logic was so fundamentally alien to how the universe actually worked that it had somehow arrived at the correct answer through sheer intuition and the basic human principle that everything probably wants to be balanced. The Luminary squad noticed Marcus sitting there looking completely unconcerned. They consulted their data. Marcus had 1 point so far. They had 17. This was not concerning them. And then they noticed what happened when the next problem appeared. Marcus looked at a tactical warfare scenario that involved 17 different species, simultaneous conflicts across 4-dimensional gradients, and approximately 300 variables that needed to be calculated in real time. He thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Then he said, "Yeah, you're thinking about it too hard. Just let the other guy punch himself out. Make him think he's winning, then hit him where it matters. Most people mess up because they want to do the complicated thing." He submitted his answer. It was the optimal solution. It required almost no additional resources, minimum casualties, and achieved complete victory through what could only be described as psychological warfare and basic human deviousness. The Luminary squad was starting to show signs of concern. Concern in Luminary was approximately a .002 shift in their emotional indicators, but it was noticeable to those trained in reading Luminary emotional fluctuations. By the end of the intellectual round, Marcus had somehow accumulated enough points to be within striking distance of victory. Not because he was smart, not because he had deep knowledge, but because he kept looking at complex problems and finding solutions through paths that shouldn't have existed but did, because human brains work in weird ways, and sometimes that's actually an advantage. A Luminary judge named Stellix made another notation. Humans solve problems through methods that violate basic logic. This is concerning, and possibly cheating, though we cannot determine how. The Galactic Council, which had been holding its collective breath, realized they might have made a significant mistake in how they'd arranged this tournament. They called for a recess. By the time the third trial was supposed to begin, things had already started to fall apart. Not the trials themselves. The trials were fine. What was falling apart was the confidence of every single competing species. The Zargon Collective had been in perfect synchronization with itself right up until they'd realized that Marcus kept doing things that violated every principle of logical thinking they'd developed, and then he kept succeeding anyway. This created a paradox in their collective consciousness. Some part of their hive mind wanted to keep trying. Some part wanted to just leave and file a complaint with the Intergalactic Safety Commission. Since they shared one mind but had conflicting impulses, they basically just sat down and didn't move for a while. Their commander announced that the Zargon Collective was withdrawing from the trial due to irreconcilable philosophical differences, and the concerning chaotic energy emanating from the human specimen. Basically, they thought Marcus was cursed or insane or possibly both. The Krell, who had been expecting to at least come in second because they always came in second or better, couldn't handle having been beaten by a human who didn't even know what he was doing. Their commander, Curax, took this as a personal insult. He stood up, declared that humans were unpredictable and uncivilized, and that the Krell had more important matters to attend to than validating the luck of biological accident. He left. His entire squad followed. The Krell had never quit a competition before in all of recorded galactic history. Now they had. Marcus didn't even notice they were gone. The Luminari were the ones that really confused people. They didn't announce any dramatic withdrawal. They just quietly sent a notification to the judges saying that they had been observing the trial and had determined that humanity's fundamental approach to problem-solving represents insufficient baseline compatibility for meaningful competition. Basically, they'd decided that Marcus was too weird for them to compete against fairly, and they didn't want to keep losing to someone who won by accident. Over the course of approximately 4 hours, the remaining 5 competing species found various reasons to bow out. The Valorians said they had a scheduling conflict. The Threll claimed the arena conditions were unsuitable for their biology, despite the fact that the arena had been specifically configured for their biology. The Shimmer Collective just left a message saying, "Wow, okay, you're good," and vanished. The Kronos faction announced they'd already won in an alternate dimension and didn't need to win here too. And the Myconid Federation basically just decomposed out of embarrassment. Marcus was confused about why everyone was leaving. He'd assumed they were taking a break. When someone finally explained to him that all 8 elite squads had officially forfeited and that he'd won the Trial of Champions, he said, "Oh, that's cool, I guess. Do we get paid now?" The Galactic Council was in complete chaos. They'd gone from carefully orchestrated competitive trial to unexpected human victory to existential crisis about what this meant for the established hierarchy of galactic civilization in approximately 6 hours. One judge turned to another and asked in pure mathematical notation what had just happened. The response, translated into English, was approximately, "I have no idea, and I'm scared." Marcus wandered off to find food, humming to himself. He'd just accidentally proven that humans were too unpredictable to be beaten in direct competition. He had no idea. By evening, the Galactic Council had reconvened for what would become the most important conference in interstellar diplomatic history, even though nobody realized it at the time. They were forced to declare Marcus Webb the winner of the Trial of Champions. The crown was placed on his head while he was eating what the council assured him was food, though he was pretty sure it was just colored energy in solid form. As Marcus left the arena to grab an actual sandwich from what passed for a food establishment in this part of the galaxy, the real analysis began. The council members, judges, and representatives from every species that had participated started having serious conversations about what had just happened and why. The Luminari representative, Stellix, started the discussion with what could only be described as academic concern. "The human did not approach any challenge with our methodology," Stellix said. "He did not optimize solutions. He did not calculate probabilities. He simply acted and then observed the consequences." "He's either a genius or completely insane," added a Valorian observer. "We cannot determine which because there appears to be no difference between the two states in human cognition." A Krell commander, still smoldering over his loss, added bitterly, "He beat us not through superiority, but through our inability to predict his movements. He succeeds because we cannot account for him." And that's when Stellix had what could only be described as a thought that changed the nature of galactic civilization. Perhaps that is the point. Humans succeed not because they are optimized for specific challenges. They succeed because they are not optimized for anything. They are adaptable. When faced with the unexpected, we calculate responses. They simply react. We prepare for predictable scenarios. They thrive in chaos. The implications spread through the council chamber like a virus of understanding. Humans weren't elite because of genetic engineering or intellectual development or millions of years of civilization building. Humans were dangerous because they brought something fundamentally different. Humans could fail spectacularly and keep going. Humans could look at a problem they didn't understand and approach it anyway. humans could succeed while being completely oblivious to how badly things should have gone. One judge, a being of crystallized energy whose name translated approximately to observer of probability, made a statement that would be repeated throughout the galaxy for centuries to come. Humanity's greatest strength is not intelligence, strength, or technology. It is their capacity to function effectively while understanding almost nothing about what they are doing. The news spread through the Galactic communications network. Humanity was no longer a cute curiosity. Humanity was unpredictable. Humanity had just defeated the galaxy's 8 most elite warrior species through a combination of stupidity, stubbornness, and the complete inability to understand why they should have lost. Species councils across the galaxy started emergency meetings. Trade agreements were reviewed. Diplomatic protocols were revised. Scientists started studying human behavioral patterns in hopes of predicting future human actions, which was basically impossible because humans were too weird about it. And Marcus, sitting in a small food establishment that served things that were technically edible if you squinted, had no idea any of this was happening. Back on Earth, Marcus was waiting for his check from the Galactic Council when representatives from Earth's governmental structures started showing up. Not military people, diplomatic people, scientists, people in suits who looked very concerned. They wanted to interview him about his performance at the Trial of Champions. They called it humanity's greatest moment. They said they needed to understand his training regimen, his mental approach to competition, his philosophical understanding of victory. Marcus looked at all of them and said, "Yeah, so, I basically just woke up, showed up late because nobody explained time zones, and then just kind of did my thing. It's called not overthinking it. Most people overthink everything. I just don't." The scientists took notes. They'd later publish papers on this concept that would take up thousands of pages, trying to explain why deliberately not thinking about things seemed to be an effective strategy. The papers would be mostly wrong, but that was fine because they were thinking about it too hard anyway. When they told Marcus that he'd single-handedly established humanity as a serious galactic power, and basically terrified all the major species into reconsidering their attitude toward Earth, Marcus said, "Oh, that's cool, I guess. I feel like I could probably do it again if they wanted another round. I'm pretty sure I could go harder than I did this morning. I was just sort of getting warmed up." The representative from the Galactic Council, who had been sent to formally acknowledge humanity's victory, actually stepped backward when Marcus said this. The idea that humans had been operating at less than full capacity during the trial had genuinely not occurred to anyone. The implications were staggering. Within a week, Marcus had become the most important human being in modern history. Within a month, he'd been offered a position as humanity's official representative to the Galactic Council, a position that involved very few responsibilities and very substantial compensation. He turned it down because he wanted to get back to construction work. His old boss rehired him immediately and gave him a substantial raise, which was probably not how normal business decisions worked. But then again, Marcus had just changed how the entire galaxy viewed his species. A luminary delegation came to visit Earth to try to understand how a species could produce individuals so fundamentally alien in their thinking. They studied Marcus for several weeks. Their final report concluded that humans were biologically, mentally, and philosophically opposed to optimal functioning, and this opposition creates an emergent property of effectiveness that defies standard analytical frameworks. Basically, they decided humans worked so well because we were completely wrong about how to approach everything, which meant we accidentally solved problems everyone else was solving wrong. In the months following the trial, other species across the galaxy started investing in understanding human behavior. Investment firms began trading human bonds. Research institutions started studying human problem-solving methodology. Military strategists started panicking about the possibility of human warfare. Meanwhile, Marcus went back to his apartment, which was now paid for approximately 9 years into the future, sat down on his couch, turned on the television, and fell asleep during the evening news cycle. He never did think much about any of it. In his dreams, he was still thinking about his next paycheck and whether he could find a good sandwich tomorrow. The universe had just discovered its most dangerous species, and that species didn't even realize it. And that, in the most fundamental way, was exactly what made humanity so terrifying.